rise above the static, dissecting issues diplomatic. With mics in hand, they brave the storm of clashing views and norms transform. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they parse the spin and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. From climate change to foreign ties, they parse the spin and sift the lies. No stone unturned, no topic taboo, as left and right come into view. The Pundits Podcast, bold and true, shining light on red and blue. Through heated takes and reasoned thought, they seek the truth that can't be bought. In times of strife when tensions flare, their steady voices fill the air. With wisdom gained from years gone by, and hopes for brighter days tonight, the Pundits Podcast marches on their epic quest, not yet done, to understand our changing world and keep democracy's flag unfurled.
Hey everybody, it's Razib with Khanversation. I'm here with my friend Josiah and Neely, and before we get started on this week's episode, I want to remind you guys to give us a positive review if you like what you hear here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. We have a channel there. I'll put the links in the show notes, but you can also find them at the website. We're getting stuff off the ground here, and it would be great if you help us out that way. Again, if you want to listen to the full conversation and all the juicier stuff, I think we're going off, I don't know if we call them mentors, maybe like parasocially, like Bob Wright and Mickey Kaus. They do that, the parent room thing. Maybe we should call it something, but right now,
stopped, but
they stopped doing the parent room.
Yeah, we're filling the void now.
Okay. So I think as this podcast is about talking about what's going on in the world out there. So there's some weird politics. That's the way we're going to introduce it. J.D. Vance is weird. The Republicans are weird. That is something that Kamala Harris and her team are putting out there. There's obviously been some coordination. Just for the listeners out there, especially the non-Americans. The way it works in American politics is, there are like e-lists and documents that are shared, and people just like go off the common notes and talking points, and they just kind of like spread like wildfire, and then the media spreads it as if it's organic. But so what do you think about this? Is it going to stick?
Yeah, I have several thoughts here. The first, and this is just speculation on my part, but Biden, when he was running, it was clear that he wanted to frame his campaign around Trump being a threat to democracy. You got to vote for the Democrats because the Republicans want to end democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And after the assassination attempt on President Trump, I suspect that they decided that they needed to cool off that rhetoric a little bit. It wasn't going to sound right to be talking about, end of democracy type of stuff when your opponent, someone shot him, right? So they needed something else. And I suspect that the weird thing is kind of a fallback or substitute for that. You're not going to shoot anybody because they're weird necessarily. So it's kind of an all-purpose thing. As you said, they've been talking about it in interviews, speeches. There's been ads, social media, often kind of like substance free. Sometimes I think it can get people in a little bit of trouble. I saw one tweet. There's a guy running for Senate in Nevada, the Republican candidate in the Senate for Nevada. I think his name is Sam Brown. He was a Iraq war vet, and his face has like scarring on it because he got hit by a IUD or something. And the Democrats there had just like a tweet of him talking about how he was weird or whatever. And maybe without really a lot of context, I'm sure the social media person that did that was just like, oh, we got to call him weird. It doesn't exactly ring right with him because, it sounds like you're making fun of his appearance or whatever.
Yeah, you gotta figure out the context of this sort of stuff that's not like very precise and specific, right?
Right. Yeah. So I don't know how effective it will be. Maybe it will be. Maybe it won't be. It seems to play well on social media, which is possibly a bad sign for how it plays, with voters often. But the big thing, mostly, okay, this is just politics. I just kind of ignore that sort of stuff. Politics tends to be kind of dumb. But the one thing that did kind of annoy me is I saw a couple days ago, there was a tweet by John Cleese of Monty Python, and I'm a big fan of Monty Python, I have to say. I thought it was pretty funny, the movies and everything. But his tweet was, it's not a surprise that Elon Musk is endorsing the weirdo party, right? So it's kind of attacking Elon Musk, who endorsed Trump, is kind of moved to the right years. And I think it's hard
Well,
to...
if you talk to Elon, he will tell you he did not move to the right.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. The world moved and he stayed the same or something. Right. But anyway, the thing about Elon, I don't think you can deny that Elon Musk is a weird guy. Right. Elon Musk was one of the founders of the two companies that merged and became PayPal back in the 90s. And certainly, back in the 90s, the idea that you would go on a website and just put in your credit card information and would buy stuff, that was pretty weird, right? Now it's not so weird. Now we accept it. But at the time, very weird. 15, 20 years ago, the idea that you would drive an electric car was weird, right? I remember in the 90s, there was a sitcom, the John Larroquette Show, and one of the characters on there, they wanted to, show that he was kind of like a out of touch crank. And the way they did it was they said, oh, this guy drives an electric car, right? So it was kind of a weird, it was a weird idea. Now it's not weird. It's a little hip, most people not driving electric vehicles, but it's not a weird thing. Elon wants to go live on Mars, right? That's still pretty weird. But in the service of that, he's built a bunch of rockets that can be reused. And actually right now, as we're speaking, a couple of our astronauts are kind of stuck in space. They might need NASA might need Elon to go bail them out, right? So I mentioned all this stuff. In January of 2020, people were making fun of Silicon Valley tech bros for being worried about a virus from China and social distancing, wearing masks. They were weirdos. 6 months later, not doing that made you weird, right? So sometimes, being weird, some weird people often are just able to see the future a little bit more than the rest of us. And I think, so this is kind of what bothers me about the weird thing, to the extent that it does, is that I feel like one of the things that has made the West successful is that we allow space for people to be kind of weird and eccentric and have all sorts of different ideas. And, a lot of times they don't amount to anything, but sometimes they do. And it's a big benefit for us. I think, a culture that kind of closes itself off from that, it's kind of headed for bad times. That's my sense of it.
Yeah. One thing I'll say is term like weird. So you were talking about the non-specificity. It kind of appeals to your emotional reactions. So, for example, we're defending democracy. That's actually like a very clear and distinct idea that you could break down into an essay, and people are going to write the same thing because everyone knows what you're talking about. To say that somebody is weird Okay, you're going to get a lot of different opinions because everyone has a different opinion. It's just not very clear what's going on here in terms of what you're saying. You can connect the dots. I will say it is different than something else which annoys me when people say gross, because that's just plainly negative. Like that's not, you can't spin that as positive. Gross is negative, and it's expressing a negative opinion. Although a lot of times when people say that things are gross, that is again not a rational analytical type of assessment. You have to understand where they're coming from. So, for example, in the 1960s, people could see an interracial relationship, and they would say gross, because that's how people felt then. Whereas today, people will see someone people will see someone criticizing an interracial relationship, and they'll say gross. So all that's really reflecting in that sense. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like a bad smell or something like that. It's not like something sensory. It's actually just reflecting a social norm, which is what I want to get to, because I think that weird is reflecting a certain type of thinking, of normativity, of like what everyone does. And I think it's very closely related, because you brought up Elon, it's very closely related to nerd, you know? And nerd, I think, has definitely gone from like ambiguous to slightly positive because of Silicon Valley. But the point here is, like, if you think outside the box, you're weird and you're a nerd, and there's a certain type of person who doesn't like weird or nerd because they're actually doing well in the current system, in the status quo. So, going back to middle school, it's the mean girls. If they call you weird or nerd, it's bad. They're marking you off as other, as different. Whereas I think as we mature to adults, and now with American culture, with its value for innovation and heterodoxy, outside the box thinking, it's not considered necessarily bad. And I think, honestly, I think so with Biden, he famously was not online in the 2020 election. Like, they ignored Twitter or the primaries.
Yeah,
and they actually did pretty well. Kamala Harris's campaign, on the other hand, I remember they were really obsessed with the memes and like all the reaction they were getting on Twitter. And her campaign, like, she was like down to like 2% in California before she dropped out before the primaries. Turns out, like, Twitter's not the real world, even though, Democratic politics and the activist class, they're all on X, I guess we call it Twitter, whatever. The reality is most voters are not on it. Most voters are not paying attention to the memes. Most voters don't know all this inside baseball stuff. I do wonder if the shift. I think your hypothesis is plausible, but I think this is also could be. I mean, Kamala Harris is taking over Biden's campaign, but the staff is mostly women, from what I've heard, and I think you have a gendered aspect here where I mean, Biden could say people are weird, but it would come off a little different. Whereas Kamala saying someone's weird and then like doing her weird laugh, ironically,
right.
it's kind of more of a piece,
Yeah. There's definitely, I feel, a generational aspect to this, where younger people are much more online. They at least know some of the weird stuff. I also kind of started with anti JD Vance memes and whatever, which you can't really translate.
We will get into it because we've been talking in a very like general, kind of like high level way, but really the weird stuff has been targeting JD Vance is specifically the instance that they want to target as a weird dude because the weird things he says supposedly, which, look, I mean, some of the stuff he says is definitely out of the mainstream.
Yeah. So I guess there's two aspects of it. One, like, some of the stuff is just like made up, right? And so and it's the sort of stuff that you couldn't repeat to a broader audience, even if you wanted to try and explain it, right? There are some stuff. There's other issues that people have kind of pointed to, like some of the social conservatism stuff. Vance made some comments about like childlessness, and he's obviously concerned about like birth rates in the United States or whatever, which Ross Douthat, the New York Times columnist, he had who himself has expressed similar sorts of concerns. He wrote something about how he thought natalism, as it's called, right? Natalism being the like a term for people who are concerned about, birth rates and children, family, or whatever, that was kind of inherently weird. I agree. It's probably kind of weird politically now. I don't know if it's going to be weird in 10, 20 years, we'll have to see. This is Elon, of course, is also interested in this issue. And sometimes again, yeah.
Well, let me just say 10, 20 years. The examples of this are legion, but I'm going to give you an example of something that is very, very normative, kind of upper middle class coded today in the United States, but that was very weird in the years after World War II. Running. So apparently, the doctor who first started noticing that people who ran, did cardio, had better health outcomes. He started running, and people actually call the cops on him because this was like the running craze really hit in the 70s, but right after World War II, they saw him running around. They thought he was mentally ill.
Yes. Well, my dad, I think in the 80s, so my dad is a dentist, and one of the things that he has done for a long time is he will go to certain places in Central America, out into rural areas and provide dental services to people who, there's no dentist there, right? So one time, I think this was in the early 80s, he and a group of other dentists did this, and they were in rural Guatemala. And one of the guys in their group was a avid runner, right? So he would go running every morning, and the kind of like villagers there, if people in 1950s America thought that was kind of weird, the villagers, they thought that was really weird because they thought the only reason you would ever run is if you were chasing somebody or someone was chasing you. So they concluded that this guy was possessed by a demon, and they were going to lay wait and ambush him, right? And kill him. Fortunately, one of the villagers told one of the other dentists, what they were planning, and he told the guy, "Hey, just don't run while you're here, just chill out for the week or whatever," right? So that's kind of I kind of comically give that as an excuse to my wife, why I don't run myself. Because
okay. Now that we're talking about this, I'm going to the gym every day, working on these machines, and pulling these weights. What if someone, I don't know, from 150 years ago saw what we were doing in the gym? That would look really weird,
Yeah. And then
why are they moving metal so strenuously? And they're lifting plates of metal. What is going on here?
Yeah, and then you ask if the person from the past asks you why, and you say, "Well, I'm trying to lose weight." They're like, "What? Why do you want to lose weight?" Right? So yeah, I mean, we live. There is I guess he's a psychologist, Joe Henrich.
A cultural evolutionist, psychologist, anthropologist.
So, I mean, one of the things that he noticed is that Western people, there's a distinctive psychology, which he calls weird psychology. It's an acronym for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. Yeah. And so I kind of always think about how, the West itself is definitionally kind of weird.
I mean, there is a little, a little bit of nominative determinism there, because I do think today, I think after the 1960s, the 60s Cultural Revolution, the late 60s Cultural Revolution, people are also more tolerant of deviance. Right. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. Just people dressing strangely. There is a lack of norms of how to dress. People conservatives and not conservatives have complained about it and other things like that too. And I think so. We are actually accepting, ironically, we are accepting of weirdness in a way. And I think in some ways it's harder for someone that's weird in the United States, because to conform requires a lot of observation and psychology, because it's not as explicit anymore. There's no uniform. There's no, this is how you have to do it. There's actually above board idea that you could just be who you are. But the reality is, you still do have to conform, and if you are genuinely weird, they will make fun of you, and human nature is still there.
Yeah, but the level of conformity is much more subtle. Yeah, so it's not just about wearing a suit and tie or, having the right hair length or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, specifically about JD, let's
Yeah.
talk about how he's strange. I mean, part of the issue is he's 39 years old, and he is very online, and he is adjacent to. Well, I mean, there was a joke in one of our group chats where it's like people in many group chats were saying, "Wait, which one of these alts is JD?" You know, so he's very close. He's very close to a lot of the memes and a lot of the I don't know, like a lot of the trends. But it's not very clear to a lot of people because people are becoming very familiar with him very, very quickly. And so there's some things that are correct that are weird about him, probably. And then there are other things that just things they're trying to stick things to him that are not correct, but that's because they don't really know. So, for example, I'm just gonna call out one thing that people are saying, and you can comment on this because it's closer to your world. People are saying he's an integralist and he's a traditionalist Catholic, a trad Cath.
Right.
To my knowledge, like those are obviously. I mean, like you could just like think about it for like 30 seconds, but most people are not going to. But they're memes that they're trying to attach to him to make him seem like this guy's a weird religious fanatic. The reality is he's not. He's a convert to Catholicism. That happens. You know about it.
Yeah, and I suspect normal not online people, and maybe even a lot of online people, don't even know what integralism is, right? So just to do a brief little data dump. I mean, originally, I think integralism was a 19th century movement in certain European countries, like Catholic European countries. And I guess if I had to sum it up, it's just, no separation of church and state, right? That state should like promote Catholicism and be guided by Catholic principles, whatever. And this was kind of, there's a lot of sub niches on the internet. And maybe about 10 years ago or something, there was a group of people who decided, like on Twitter, as it was, decided that the solution for America was American integralism. The Pope is gonna provide guidance for America. So, okay, weird, yes.
That is weird. Well, no, it's a little less weird. It's a little less weird than the idea that white Americans need to go back to their ancestral religion of Norse paganism or something.
Right,
It's a little less weird than that, but it's kind of in that direction.
Yeah, you can also find accounts promoting that, oddly often with Japanese anime avatars, which I don't think is exactly European, but we won't get into that. But anyway, so there were people who did this. But the thing is, like, JD Vance, as far as I know, had like no connection or interaction with this particular subgroup. He wasn't Catholic then. He wasn't even particularly political then, and his political valence has always been much more, concerned about like Rust Belt issues. To the extent he has like a faction on the online right or whatever. It's a different faction.
Yeah. So let me just be explicit. He converted to Catholicism in 2019, which that's 5 years ago. He was 34. He's an adult convert. His wife is a Hindu, and she's the probability of her converting to Christianity is very low from what I have heard from people that know her. And he was raised in a broadly evangelical Protestant or Pentecostal, born again, whatever, just kind of non-denominational low church Protestantism that's common among the quote unquote hillbilly people of Greater Appalachia.
Right.
And he was not religious by the time he was in college. So let's say like 10 years or so of being not religious, and before that from like a Protestant, born again, evangelical. His dad was a Pentecostal. He was into that as a teen. Secular, and then he goes into Catholicism when he's 34. That's his journey. It's a little weird. It's a little atypical, but he's not a trad Catholic integralist.
I mean, so Americans do switch denominations a lot, right? And
It's about like 50, around 50% in your lifetime
right.
probability of at least one switch.
Yeah, and so a lot of that obviously is switching between different, Protestant denominations. You're Methodist, but then you start going to Presbyterian church or whatever. But switches, conversions back and forth from Catholicism to Protestantism it's not that uncommon. Mike Pence, I believe, was raised Catholic and ended up a evangelical. Vance went the other way. There's kind of, especially among more like, bookish people, there's been a tradition of like people converting to Catholicism or whatnot.
The road to Rome.
Right, exactly. He doesn't, when people talk about a traditionalist Catholic, sometimes people have asked me, am I a traditionalist Catholic or whatever? And obviously there's no formal membership criteria or whatever, but I think like that particular group, these are people who attend the Latin Mass, maybe like the wife stays home with the kids or whatever. And it doesn't seem to be JD, he's obviously a conservative guy. I'm sure he's sincere in his beliefs, in terms of being Catholic or whatever, but it doesn't seem like it's a huge animating force in terms of like either his politics or like I don't think any of that for him. Yeah.
I want to say, I think this goes back to what we were talking about with just like explicit and implicit earlier. There's some explicit things about being a trad Cath, but then there's other implicit things. So for example, if you're a trad Cath, you better be having like 8 children and you better be hanging out with other people with 8 children. Right? So it's just they have a whole subculture in the United States. It's like Mormons or whatever, Seventh-day Adventists. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's like cultural norms that are like implicit within trad Cath American culture, just like there's norms implicit within trad Cath French culture, apparently. And these are something that just have evolved sociologically. JD does not fit the pattern. I also want to say, to be clear, like, he converted in 2019. I'm not saying, because I can't like read someone's psychology or their soul, but if JD had not converted, if he had not become Christian, he would definitely not be senator or vice president. That's a fact. Okay. And
so that's true, but he could have. It would have been easy for him to just say, "Well, I'm a Christian."
Yeah.
We've had plenty of presidents who have been.
Easy mode would just be say, "Oh, like I'm a Methodist, like my ancestors."
Right.
Again.
Exactly.
Like I decided to go back to church, whatever. But also, I want to say, like, he's religious from everything that we can see, but it also seems pretty clear he's not like religious. Like he's religious within like the normal range of religiousness. That's what I'm trying to get at, because people are trying to
Thomas Aquinas.
Or the Pope, it's just like, because people are trying to portray him a certain way. And, I've had conversations with people that are close to him and, they're just very clear, like, yeah, he's Catholic, but, it's like, he's not like reading like Catholic apologetics all the time. As you said, the really distinctive weird thing about him is his economics. And do you want to talk about that a little bit? Just because, you've been involved in like libertarian conservatism, the liberty movement for a while. And there's a new thing that's kind of, he and like Shahrab Armari are kind of vocal about it. Maybe Oren Cass, like these new types of. They're I don't know what they call themselves, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, and I think it's definitely possible to overstate how much of a departure this is. So traditionally, conservatism or whatever was considered. People would talk about the three-legged stool, right? So you had social conservatism, and then there was kind of limited government, free market conservatism, and the third one would be strong national defense or whatnot, right? And that was at least rhetorically, that was true. In practice, maybe it wasn't always. People would deviate from that a little bit. And with Trump, there's been, I would say, a bit of a realignment. Trump, a couple of things that he has deviated from the traditional economic conservatism platform on. One is trade. He's not a free trader. He's more of like open to tariffs. And then the other big one is, Republicans like Paul Ryan or whatever. They were always trying to find ways to cut Social Security and Medicare, right, or reduce spending on Social Security and Medicare. Which, look, I mean, it is the case that like those programs take up an awful lot of the budget, and it's growing. And you look at like the charts, are they fiscally sustainable?
Yeah, I gotta jump in here. Just really funny. Like, I think it's called like it's like Funny or Die. There's like a rap video from 2012 with Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, and like Paul Ryan's part is like he's like doing weights because he does like pee whatever, and he like gets in some old woman's face. he says he's gonna take her Social Security away, and he just like pushes her. Sorry, I can't forget that.
Right. So Trump is like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to cut, Social Security, Medicare, or whatever. So Vance, but in general, other than that, a lot of his like Trump's views on economics is, it's pretty free market. Like he's for deregulation, lower taxes, all that sort of stuff. Right. Certainly the administration was in that line. And I feel like Vance is kind of the same way. He definitely, his focus has been on like, manufacturing Rust Belt communities or whatever that have kind of got hammered through foreign trade, illegal immigration or immigration, and then automation and technology, right? So trying to find a way to like deal with all that. He's been maybe a little bit more open to some regulation of things like rail or whatever. So rhetorically, definitely not as much, but he's obviously, I would like his background is he was VC. He worked with a lot of like he's got a lot of connections with the Silicon Valley tech people, and I know there's been a big move towards the Republicans from a lot of tech people, not only Elon, David Sachs, but
Andreessen, Mark Andreessen,
yeah,
Horowitz,
Andreessen and Horowitz. They actually had a podcast where they talked about why they were endorsing Trump, and it was all about AI. It was all about tech stuff, AI, crypto, unrealized capital gains. Like they didn't talk at all about immigration or tariffs or anything.
Well, because they hope that that's just like the talking point. They're not going to execute on either of them. I know,
Well, I'm sure
right-leaning people in the Valley, they're like a little like they do get a little triggered when you talk about 10% tariffs, which I think anyone does. Well, frankly, most people.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, my point is, they were really focused on, a lot of these tech issues, which are not like, if you poll voters, these are not probably like top 10 issues, but they view it as being very important for the future of the economy. And on that, I feel like Vance as well as Trump are kind of in the more free market space, right?
Yeah, let me bring up like a very, very niche issue for that nobody would know about, but as a person, I would say I'm tech adjacent, so if you're a small startup, 99, okay, maybe 95% of the time, the way that you as a founder or an early employee will make money off your equity and off your shares is through acquisition, through a big company acquiring you. Well, Lena Khan, is she at the FTC or the whatever? Yes. So at the Federal Trade Commission, she is blocking. She and her people, they're anti-monopolists, so they are blocking the acquisition by the big tech companies of small companies. The problem here is the big tech companies have the money, and the small tech companies want money. And so what Lena Khan is doing is saying, oh, well, we don't want Google to get your awesome technology. You should become your own big thing. But that's extremely hard. And that's like a 10-year plan as opposed to 1.5 years you exit with 10, $20 million in cash and you can do your next thing. And so there are people in the Valley, I've talked to them when I go out to San Francisco from Austin, they're excited to get Lena Khan out of there. They will do it. I mean, they'll vote for RFK, they'll vote for whoever. Okay, they don't care about all this other stuff. They want their $20 million. You know,
Yeah.
they want the acquisitions again.
Even Reid Hoffman, who's like a big Biden Harris, tech person or whatever. I think he doesn't like Lena Khan either. He's wanted to get rid of her.
Yeah.
So
the Biden administration has been more economically populist. I think it's partly because Biden is, he's resentful and he's a little bit dumb.
Right. Yeah. So I feel this is, I think, so I would say on a lot of issues, the Republican, despite like rhetorical changes, the Republican Party is still a lot more free market than the Democratic Party. And this tech stuff, I think it's just one example of that. But I think that's kind of true for a lot of different areas. Now, tariffs or whatnot, obviously there's going to be some differences. Calvin Coolidge was a big tariff guy. I'm personally, I'm more of a free trade person myself, Yeah.
So let's just be clear on the history of this. It used to be, so basically the early 19th century was a different time, and the Democratic Republicans, which became the Democratic Party, were the free trade party. They were the party that the Southern planters were funding to a large extent, in alliance with a few people in the North and the Mid-Atlantic. They were pro-free trade because cotton is something they want to export to places like England. Whereas the Whigs, and Abraham Lincoln started out as a Whig, became a Republican. The Republican Party came out predominantly from the Whigs. There were some anti-slavery Democrats that joined the Republican Party, but they were pro-tariff because they want to develop the economy of the United States, particularly the Great Lakes, the Northeast, the early light industrial economy. This tendency of pro-free trade versus anti-free trade of the Republican and the Democratic parties, where the Democrats were the pro-free trade and the Republicans were anti-free trade, continued till after World War II, when the GATT and the Bretton Woods and all these new economic systems came to the fore. And basically the two parties, the Democrats actually became the anti-free trade party in a lot of ways because they're more working class, more manufacturing. But basically the party's elites, aside from maybe the far left, kind of became pro-free trade. Both there was kind of like the establishment, whatever, the Washington consensus, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. I think the clearest example of this would be in 1992, for example. Both George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton they wanted to do NAFTA, they wanted to expand free trade, and it was Ross Perot, third party guy. He had to hold down the protectionist anti-trade.
And NAFTA was passed with predominantly Republican votes, a minority of business-oriented Democrats, but there were a lot of people like Dick Gephardt, Dave Bonnier, the old economically focused Midwestern industrial heartland Democrats that were still anti-free trade. If you want to whatever, no one needs to read a whole history of it, but Matt Stoller wrote an article in The Atlantic in 2016 that talked about the more business oriented professional class Democrats that entered the party in the 1970s after Watergate. And that's when a lot of the changes started happening, because if you're like Steve Jobs, who was a hardcore Democrat, you want free trade. Your economic interests are connected to this globalized economy. And so there was a break within the Democratic Party between the two wings when it came to trade. Whereas the Republicans, the populist element, had actually been skeptical of free trade. I remember in the 1990s, there was stuff about I remember seeing a thing about in Oregon about Rush Limbaugh, the people in Rush Limbaugh, and how they were all ditto heads. They agreed with Rush Limbaugh. But when it came to NAFTA, that was the one thing where all of the people were 3/4 of them were I actually oppose free trade. Right. Because they're just against foreigners and foreign things. Because that's
right.
That's just how a lot of Americans are. To be that's just how they are. And whereas Rush was going along with the elite Republican consensus. So anyway, that's how JD's weird. And there's this rhetorical debate going on. But as you said, the personnel of both parties is still a holdover from pro anti-market. It's still kind of reflexes that are there, muscle memory.
Right, right. And I guess my point just on the tariffs is, if you were to go back to the period where the Republicans were the anti-foreign trade, were the protectionist party, and the Democrats were the free trade party, that didn't translate into the Democrats being a free market oriented party and the Republicans anti-market. The Republicans, aside from that trade issue, back then were very, very pro business, pro market, and the Democrats tend to be more interventionist. So it can exist, that sort of dichotomy. But one thing I do, we talked about like how JD Vance, like his background, how he is and is not weird, and I feel like this ties in to an article you just published in the American Conservative, right? I think it was your return to AmCon after a long hiatus. It's called Trump's Americans, and
21 years.
21 years, yeah. What was the prior piece about? The one?
It was about like old Europe. It was about like foreign policy in Europe, and
Okay.
it was 2003. Okay, it was a long time ago. We were worried about the war on terror. Yeah. Although I have to say, I think like most of my unlike a lot of people, I think we're similar here. Our general overall like political orientation, like I would say over the 21 years, it's not really changed that much.
Mhm.
Pretty much like where I always was. So I would have written this back then if I knew what I know now.
Right, right. Yeah. So maybe because this, I think, gets into some of the maybe deep cultural differences between Americans, particularly in different parts of the country or whatever.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I mean, do you wanna like talk about like what you took home from it, and then I can like I don't know.
Sure. So the obviously, so there's a famous book, Albian Seed by David Hackett Fisher. I guess it came out in the 80s, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
That's not hugely important, but one of the things the thesis of his book is that there, the early America was populated, almost exclusively by people from the British Isles, but there were actually four different groups that came from different parts of the country and different segments of society. They settled primarily in different parts of the United States, and they were just very culturally different in all sorts of ways, politically in terms of family, religion, even like language and food, how they view like gender relations, how they view
Yeah. Well,
fighting.
let me
Yeah.
interject real quickly. There was a European visitor to Missouri. Just illustration to Missouri, like I think in the 1850s or 1840s, somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. And so Missouri was predominantly settled from the Upper South, so they're border people, Scots Irish, like border people, and a minority of people were also Yankee. So for St. Louis, for example, has an old New England Yankee upper class. T.S. Eliot descended from those people. He grew
Mhm.
up in St. Louis, but he was New England stock. Okay, so this European, it wasn't like it might have been Crevacroix. No, I think it wasn't Crevacroix. It was somebody, but it was like a French guy. It wasn't Tocqueville. I don't think it was de Tocqueville, but basically, I was observing. You could tell a Yankee house from a person from the South, the Upper South, because the person from the Upper South would have like pigs in the front yard, and they would the house would be like a shotgun house, be really ramshackle. And then a Yankee house would have like a fence, a really nice a nice well done fence. It would be brick, etc., etc. And like the issue here is just there's different levels of capital investment into the housing based on your Yankee or Upper South. Even though the climate obviously is the same for both of them in Missouri, but I mean part of it is just due to like in New England, you got to have like good houses because it gets really cold. And there were other things that people noticed, like in terms of how the towns are laid out. Michigan had like hundreds of grammar schools in 1850, and Arkansas had like a handful.
Yeah.
And it's just like based on like what people are investing in. But go on.
Yeah, yeah. So the four groups, you have the Yankees, right? The Puritans, the New Englanders, mostly, although they go to other places. They came from East Anglia, and they were like much more orderly, rationalistic, I would say, very moralistic, very regimented in terms, high conscientiousness, right? Group, also kind of like egalitarian in their outlook, relatively speaking. Second group, you have in Virginia, the kind of Tidewater people, and down in maybe like some of the upper South, came from the English Cavalier stock or whatnot. So much more hierarchical, genteel. We kind of have this. We still have stereotypes of like the New England Yankee and the Virginia gentleman. In Pennsylvania, you got the Quakers. I don't know as much about them, but then the fourth group, which I think is very significant, is the so-called the Borderers or the Scots-Irish, although they're not necessarily Irish or Scots.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah,
a lot of them are Scots Irish is like shorthand, but people that have like looked in places like West Virginia have told me actually genealogically, most of those people came from England, not from Northern Ireland, which is the Scots Irish show up in the 1750s. There's a huge wave of them that show up in Philadelphia, go to the interior of Pennsylvania, go south along the Appalachians. So that's why they made a big wave. But the reality is, apparently, a lot of them are just from like Yorkshire and other places in Northern England as well. But those places are culturally very close to where the Scotch Irish came from in Scotland, which is the lowlands mostly.
Right. So they settled more along the interior.
Those are J.D. Vance's people.
Correct. Yeah. So why is this book significant? One, like, I think there's two significant things. Not only are there these four groups, but Fisher argues that a lot of the cultural patterns we see in the groups when they immigrated are the same as you saw the cultural patterns from the source populations in Great Britain, and those cultural folkways, he calls them, continue down to the present day in terms of the culture, right? So this borderer group that J.D. Vance comes from, this is, I mean, if you think about like the New England people, you've got like your John Adams, right, is a political figure. The Tidewater people is a Thomas Jefferson, maybe, right? The back country people, you're talking about Andrew Jackson, right? You're talking about Polk, you're talking Harry Truman, right? Very earthy LBJ, right? And JD
populist.
Yeah, Sam Houston, right? Yeah, populist. Pugilistic Marshall, right? Fiercely independent, right? They don't like, you talk about like people not liking foreigners. They're very traditionally very xenophobic, but xenophobic, not only they don't like, people from other countries, they, foreigners might be someone from New York, right? Foreigners.
Oh no, it would be someone from the next county.
Correct. Yes. So foreigners could be someone.
The Hatfields and the McCoys, that like famous feud. By the way, the Vance surname, by the way, I just want to tell you guys, it originally comes from East Lothian in Scotland, but they were descended from the Norman family DeVoe, and so the Vances were originally Scottish Normans that somehow got to Ulster. So it is a Scots-Irish surname, but its origin is actually French. Anyway, just so like this stuff is complicated. It's not like the Scots-Irish, like that group, the Borderers, have like complicated origin actually. Anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, if you read Vance's memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, like he talks a lot about his family or whatnot and his family background, and there's all this stuff is true, in terms of like, work, family, violence, all this stuff. And this group has been very significant, I would say, politically. And your article is kind of about how Trump, even though he's not of that background, which is, something I would want to ask you about, but he kind of has tapped into this group and activated it. And that's kind of like his base of support.
If you look at the 2016 map, 2016 map where Trump outperformed, say, like, I don't know, Kerry. That's a good baseline. Kerry 2004 is kind of like, before the Obama realignment. There's a massive shift towards the Republicans in, basically the broader Appalachian area, like basically wherever the Scots-Irish, borderers, whatever you want to call them. In the census, they often list themselves as American because their ancestors were here before the Revolution. They don't know where in Scotland they're from, or Ireland or wherever. Like they're not, or England. They're very vague about that because it's been like 200 to 300 years, and unlike the Puritans, they don't take as good. First of all, they're not as much into record keeping, but
Right.
secondly, like the Puritans, like if your family has lived in Salem, Massachusetts for 300 years, you know exactly where in England they're from. They're from Salem, England, like that area. You know what I'm saying? It's a very like localized area. Aside from East Anglia, like Essex and stuff. Like there's like London, a few other towns, Plymouth. But so the hypothesis. So I wrote this partly because you saw this affinity. But where is Trump from? Hope you enjoyed the podcast so far. To listen to the rest of it, please go to Khanversation.substack.com.
Two minds met on a summer's eve, each with truths they long believed. Words flowed like a winding stream as hours passed in deep debate. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. In listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. They spoke of justice, spoke of change, of history's weight and future's range. Their views at first seemed worlds apart, but patience bridged the divide. It's not about who's wrong or right, but understanding others' light. In civil discourse we can find ties that gently bind. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. As dawn broke soft on dewy grass, they smiled and shook hands at last. Two souls enriched by reason talk, united in respect. And after all was said and done, they found a thread of common ground. And listening close, they came to see a shared humanity. This folk song captures the essence of a long, thoughtful discussion between two public intellectuals. It emphasizes the power of patient listening, mutual respect, and the discovery of common ground. The gentle tone reflects the calm and understanding they reach after their debate. you like me to expand on any